Hello people, this week as a case study for n-body problems, we discuss GADGET. GADGET is a particular parallel code for cosmological simulations. GADGET is an acronym for Galaxies with Dark Matter and Gas Interact. Its origin implementation was released in 2001. Then, later on in 2005, its second version, known as GADGET 2, was introduced. This tool is used to simulate a wide array of astrophysical problems ranging from colliding and merging galaxies to the formation of celestial bodies in the universe. Last week, we studied the n-body problems. It is interesting to note that in the heart of GADGET, we have a parallel n-body code computing gravitational forces. The code supports both particle mesh and Barnes-Hut methods for the simulation of particles moving under the force of gravity. Another important capability of GADGET is its ability to simulate the gas fluid that permeate galaxies through a particular CDF algorithm called Smooth Particle Hydrodynamics, or SPH. Earlier in this module, we studied lattice-based algorithms for fluid dynamics simulation such as lattice gas and lattice Boltzmann models. It's mentioned that we can numerically compute the macroscopic properties of particles such as density and velocity using these models. Like the lattice-based method, smooth particle hydrodynamics is another approach for fluid dynamics simulation, but particles in this approach are not limited to a lattice and can move freely through space. So, GADGET takes into consideration the impact of two forces on the particles: pressure forces from fluid dynamics and gravitational forces as discussed in n-body simulations last week. Now, we want to discuss the parallelization strategies in GADGET. GADGET 2 is parallelized for distributed memory clusters and supercomputers using MPI. In the parallel implementation, the nodes of a Barnes-Hut tree are decomposed, distributing across cluster nodes. As you know, for parallelization, the workload should be divided between processors. But domain decomposition in this application is not straightforward, and we should employ irregular decomposition techniques to achieve high performance. I will explain this matter in the following slides. As explained in the parallel computing module, we use decomposition techniques to divide data, which is particles in this application, into some domains where each runs on a single processor. Decomposition algorithms usually divide workload evenly to make loads of all processors balanced. However, in this problem, we cannot use the regular decomposition techniques because some regions might have many more particles than others, and therefore even domain decomposition leads to poor load balancing. In addition, traditional domain decomposition doesn't work properly in this application because particles frequently move throughout space and we want to maintain physically close particles on the same processor to avoid extra communication cost. To address this issue, GADGET 2 uses a space filling technique named Pino-Hilbert curve for domain decomposition. In this approach, the simulation space, which can be 2 or 3 dimensional, is mapped onto a one-dimensional curve. This 1D curve is then simply decomposed into partitions that define the individual domains. This slide shows examples of the Pinot-Hilbert curves in 2 dimensions. For instance, this U-shaped curve fills a 2 by 2 grid and maps it to a one-dimensional domain with 4 partitions. As shown here, we can label each cell by its location along the Pinot-Hilbert curve. To fill a 4 by 4 grid, the bar of U is replaced with 2 smaller copies of the underlying U, while at the 2 ends, rotated and mirrored copies have to be placed, as we can see here. In the same manner, we can recursively build expand curve for larger grids. All particles in a particular cell are labeled with the position of the cell in the curve, as explained earlier. For example, the Pinot-Hilbert label for this cell is 3. So, all particles in this cell have the same key value 3. This figure shows a close correspondence between the spatial decomposition obtained by a hierarchical tree and that obtained from decomposing a Pinot-Hilbert curve. In this example, this curve fills a 2-dimensional space encompassing the whole particle set. This space is in the root node. To decompose the domain into 4 subdomains and create a quad Barnes-Hut tree, we cut this curve into 4 pieces, where each piece is given to a processor. Then, in the same manner, each segment is recursively cut into 4 pieces again to regenerate the spatial tree structure of the corresponding Barnes-Hut tree. As shown here, we can effectively assign a collection of branches of this tree to each processor. We can also adjust the domain size allocated to processors by changing this cutting point. Now, you might ask how we should divide the curve into segments with an approximately balanced workload. In a simulation problem, the number of cells is highly greater than the number of particles in the universe. So, we have lots of sparse cells with none or few particles. To achieve load balance, we should evenly divide particles between processors so that the load keeps balanced. In previous slides, it is explained how we fill a grid with a Pinot-Hilbert curve to map the grid onto a 1D line. To obtain a load balance workload distribution, we first sort particles by their Pinot-Hilbert key and then divide particles evenly between P processors. This way, the curve is divided into P load balance partitions. This decomposition approach has some interesting characteristics. First, it makes the workload balanced between processors. In addition, domains are connected in real space because particles in a cell are all assigned to a single processor, and this way we prevent from the inter-processor communications. In this video, we can see one of the simulations done with GADGET. This simulation shows 2 colliding and merging spiral galaxies. I have downloaded the video from GADGET to homepage, as you can see its URL here. There are many videos and images generated by GADGET to simulations available on this homepage. And This brings us to the end of this week's lecture. Thanks for your attention.